It was a nail-biting 24 hours for America and the world, watching as the votes to pick the next US president started being counted Tuesday night. Of course, all the votes have never been counted on election night itself, but this election has been, in every sense of the word, unprecedented. Never has a US presidential race been held amid a pandemic, a historic turnout of early voters, and outrageous displays of political antics and clashes, with the president himself falsely claiming victory at one point and his campaign manager calling for Wisconsin to have a recount when it was called as a win for Joe Biden. Deciding the winner may have to come down to the very last vote, and so the waiting game continues, with all eyes on states that are remaining, like Pennsylvania, which weren't allowed to count all early ballots before Election Day. But settling the dust may have more complications, with threats of lawsuits and the possibility of one candidate refusing to accept the outcome. We can only speculate at this point, of course, but we try to make sense of what's going on, what we've been seeing so far. And for this, I'm joined by David Byler, data analyst and political columnist for the Washington Post. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And the election, of course, is being very closely observed all around the world. And for that, we have Brendan O'Connor, Associate Professor of American Politics at the University of Sydney. Thank you for joining us today. It's lovely to see you again.
Nice to be on your show.
Well, let's go straight into the questions now, David. The vote counting is continuing in your country, and some states, they're accepting mail-in ballots even after this week. And of course, in states like Wisconsin, we're expecting some disputes where Trump's campaign manager says he'll request a recount. Now, when do you think you will actually declare a winner?
Right. So this is a slightly complicated question. Typically, media outlets call the race when they have enough information, but that doesn't make the count official. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get enough information to call the race within the next day or the coming week, or excuse me, days or the coming week. The question of when it becomes official, it's sort of a multi-step process that goes all the way through December and January. But hopefully that ends up just being an uneventful ceremonial process. And, we just know the results and it runs smoothly starting relatively soon.
Well, before the elections happened, it looks like, the polls were mostly in favor of Joe Biden, but it looks like they were wrong again, like in 2016, not in the sense that President Trump has won or anything, but in the sense that, the polls, they massively undercounted the number of voters that are backing President Trump. What do you think the pollsters missed this time, and were the margins much narrower than they thought in the swing states?
Right. So that's a great question. For the next few months or maybe years, I think a lot of public opinion researchers are going to be tackling exactly that. Some of the measures that survey researchers used to attempt to get the samples right and correct for their mistakes in 2016 clearly did not work as well as they had hoped. One was to weight by education to get more non-college educated white voters in the sample. Clearly that didn't work. One was to keep polling right until the end of the election to make sure they caught enough late movement, sort of found people who were deciding their minds at the last minute. What they did there was also not quite enough. So it's really an open question that's going to be the source of a lot of research over the next months and years.
Now, Brendan, President Trump, he won the presidential election in 2016 because he managed to win the traditionally Democratic states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, each by less than 1 percentage point. And on Wednesday morning in the US, the margins in Nevada and the Rust Belt states started shifting left and remained a bit too close to call. Do you think the Biden campaign at this stage can be quite confident that the number of mail-in ballots will turn the key states blue? I mean, all eyes seem to be on Pennsylvania right now. What do you think Biden's chances are at this point?
Well, it's not the campaigns that are doing the counting, thankfully. It's independent people. The Washington Post, the New York Times is calling Wisconsin and Michigan as very likely Biden victories because the votes are nearly counted in both states. So Nevada has a few outstanding votes. It's very close there. That is pivotal for Biden to win that state, and Arizona to win the presidency. And therefore, Pennsylvania wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter who won Pennsylvania, and things are slowest in the counting in that state because, as you said, the legislature, the Republican legislature, wasn't very keen on votes being counted before Election Day like they were in Florida, which makes things a bit more sort of faster and allows us to have more information and more certainty, which was very unfortunate. The counting wasn't started beforehand. So Biden is in a strong position, but there's still votes to be counted in Arizona and Nevada. So we're not in a position to call the election, and those who are frustrated by Donald Trump's claims that he, in his own mind, has already won, probably just have to be patient and let everyone's voice be heard.
Now, Brendan, well, Biden, he was campaigning quite aggressively in states like Florida, but he did so badly in the Democratic county of Miami-Dade. I mean, what happened there?
Well, the information we have so far is that Hispanic voters seem to have come out in stronger numbers for Donald Trump, not just Cubans and Venezuelans who got away from communism in those countries or socialism, but maybe also Pentecostal Latinos. So that group has probably been underrated, that have been probably encouraged by some of the conservative choices on the Supreme Court. Plus, with American elections, there's always a sense of who's going to turn up. Last time, only 59% of eligible voters turned up. In Australia, nearly everyone turns up because you get fined if you don't vote. It's compulsory. So with maybe up to 65% of the population voting in America for this election, new people came out. Some of those people would have been whites without college degrees that are very much strongly in Trump's camp. And so he seems to have been very effective at rallying the types of people that really strongly supported him over really the last 4 years and never wavered. And that was probably through old-fashioned campaigning, getting out there on the huskings in a pandemic, plenty of people without a mask, having those huge rallies, possibly more effective than many of us might have guessed.
Mm-hmm. Doing what he does best, you know, going out to those rallies. Well, David, now after America was America having experienced a global pandemic and one of the highest death rates from COVID-19, and even the president's own hospitalization from the virus and a summer of historic civil unrest, how is it that Joe Biden isn't winning by a huge margin? I mean, what is it about Donald Trump that still speaks to voters?
Right. Well, I think there's a few things. One is that American politics is deeply divided on cultural and demographic lines. Essentially, what happens is both parties start out with an almost unmovable base of really a large chunk of the population. So essentially, a lot of Republicans think, wow, Democrats want, higher taxes or liberal positions on social issues or whatever the characterization might be. And then they say, I'm automatically voting for Trump. So that's locked in. The second portion is that if you look at what the most important issue is to different groups of voters, a lot of Republicans are likely to say the economy. So that might signal that there was some fatigue with the lockdowns and the recession that happened. And then another piece of this is Trump himself. A lot of Republicans really trust the president as sort of their primary news source, as their primary source of information. And the president has spread really an immense amount of misinformation about the severity of the pandemic, about the death toll, about things along those lines. So I think there's a combination of factors, but really the pandemic, while it's the chief thing that's happening in American politics, it didn't shake the foundation. The foundation is still partisanship. And there are also a number of other issues that voters use to decide their choice.
And David, now about 300 lawsuits have already been filed over the election, and President Trump, of course, he's threatened legal action if the election seems unfair in his view. And according to a Democratic Party official, they've already dedicated some $10 million to litigation efforts and are prepared to spend more if on post-election procedures if need be. Now, if the election outcome is disputed, then what's going to happen in the coming days and weeks before the next president officially takes office?
Right. Well, this is an area where there are a lot of unknowns because not all legal challenges are created equal. If Trump ends up losing some of these states by a significant margin, he might try to challenge it in court, but then the challenge would be widely regarded as something less serious. People would pay less attention. It really matters what the final margin is in a lot of these states, some of which have been called and some of which haven't. Beyond that, there's sort of a multi-level structure to the American legal system. You have lower courts and then courts that are higher to that, and then the Supreme Court sort of at the top of it all. So, if there was a challenge that was substantive and that mattered for the result, it would make its way up through that court system and through that sort of Byzantine process, and we just have to see how it goes.
Now, Brendan, it was also, well, it was a rather disappointing night for the Democrats in the Senate race. Because the Democrats, of course, they were very set on reclaiming the chamber. Do you think, given the voters' choices right now, a very divided America, the Democratic Party needs to maybe rethink its strategy or messaging?
Well, you're fighting elections with very different voters. I mean, they were wanting to win in North Carolina. There were 2 Senate races going on in Georgia. The messaging to win those much more moderate and, frankly, conservative states might be quite different to the messaging that you have to win in California or that you're winning in, Colorado. So it's hard to fight both a national campaign and a campaign in 50 different states. And that's one of the challenges of modern politics, that the Democrats want to find a way to keep on board their progressive elements of the party, but they also want to appeal to moderates in states like Georgia and North Carolina. And Biden and Harris sort of were more that moderate side of the party, but that didn't excite probably some voters, elsewhere. And it's probably not a long-term strategy for the Democratic Party to be the not Trump party and sort of want to split the difference on things and be a party of the middle. At some point, it's got to probably campaign on a set of issues that relate to policies, to plans, and there was very little of that in this campaign. It was all about a referendum on Donald Trump, the second election in a row, which was really all about whether Trump was fit to be president of the United States. And that, in some ways, has real limitations as a political position.
And well, David, now, even after a winner is declared and the dust is settled, the nation will still remain quite divided. What do you think this election has really taught us about American society and how it should move forward?
I think divided is the exact correct word. There's, a few races left to be called, but there's a certain likelihood that Republicans maintain control of the Senate, Democrats have control of the House, and then if Biden wins, Democrats would have control of the presidency. In that case, there's going to be a lot of gridlock, a lot of inability for legislation to be passed. So in an ideal world, the parties would learn to do deal making a little bit better. And I think that it teaches us that really our parties have kind of taken advantage of the cultural divide and created these almost optimal strategies where it's very hard for one of them to get a dominant majority or to get a majority that lasts for a long time. And it's very easy for one party or the other to disrupt each other. So that puts compromise at a premium if you care about lawmaking.
Thank you. And now, Brendan, the same question to you, really. What do you think this election has taught us about American society, especially from the international perspective? What do you think America's traditional allies hope to see from this very nerve-wracking election?
Well, I think divided is the right word to see America, that divided not just in a sense of 2 political parties, but 2 systems of information, that I think the rest of the world gets a lot of the information from venues in America, great newspapers and networks that are largely more supportive of the Democratic Party and have been highly critical of Donald Trump. And so that view, I think, is shared by a lot of international news agencies and doesn't really see the facts of, the COVID pandemic as Donald Trump did, to dismiss it as flu-like and not particularly serious. But there is a portion of the American public who really takes to the Trump view, or takes to the view that the economy should be the focus, not the global pandemic. So that has been jarring, I think, for an international audience to see that side of America, which in some regards has always been there, this kind of libertarian, live free or die, or maybe at the moment, live free and die kind of approach to life, that has been amplified by Donald Trump's I'm not going to listen to anyone, I'm an outsider, I'm against all the elites, the scientists, the epidemiologists, whoever wants to tell anyone what to do. And so that has really been, I think, unleashed by Donald Trump. And it's come with a very unfortunate element that instead of just accepting the facts and then arguing over the policies about how you deal with those facts, the facts themselves have been up for grabs on climate change, on COVID. And that, I think, from outside of the United States has been seen as very unfortunate, and particularly also this questioning of the results when all the counting didn't occur. I think many democracies around the world were there was a shudder in them of a sense of the basic principle of a democracy is every vote's got to count, and then you gracefully accept the result. You have a peaceful transition of power.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we're going to have to leave the discussion on this very nerve-wracking election that's leaving America and the rest of the world hanging as all the votes are being counted. That was David Byler, data analyst and political columnist for The Washington Post, and Brendan O'Connor, Associate Professor of American Politics at the University of Sydney. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
And to our viewers, thank you very much for watching. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow here in South Korea with the latest updates on the US presidential race. Until then, have a lovely day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.